Welcome to the Runna Podcast. I'm Ben, head coach.
And I'm Anya, international marathon runner. And we're proud to be the #1 rated running coaching service worldwide.
We'll be having truly insightful conversation with truly inspirational guests, as well as bringing you tips and tricks for runners of all abilities.
Today on the podcast, we had the most inspiring chat with Billy Monger, who started out as a professional motorsport driver. He won the British Champs when he was just 10 and started to dream of a career in F1. He unfortunately had an awful car accident when he was 17, which changed his whole life trajectory. Since then, he talks about how he tackled life as now a double amputee, and his say yes to everything lifestyle is so amazing. He has just competed in the Ironman Kona World Championship and set the world record for the fastest time as a double amputee. It is totally amazing, and you'll love this episode.
Hey Billy, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
Amazing. Well, we would love to start by asking what it is that got you into sport and maybe motorsport all those years ago.
So it was actually my dad that got me into motorsport when I was a kid. So my dad and all his mates growing up, they used to do a bit of like racing stuff, not that competitive, more for fun. And he actually bought me my first go-kart when I was 2 years old, and I couldn't drive it until I was 6. So he was fairly keen for me to give it a go. So he bought me a go-kart when I was 2. I had my first go when I was 6, and I was that slow when I started. I always say that he used to run around the track in front of me, and he's not Mo Farah. So like that was the level I started off at, and then just loved it and grew from there.
Wow. And so was it the case that as soon as you were kind of old enough to drive it, you were just wanting to drive it in all your time?
I think when I started, like obviously my dad was keen for me to try it because he loved like racing and cars so much. And then very quickly, like being like a 6-year-old kid who you don't really know what you're signing up for at that point in time. Like you're just doing this thing which looks cool. And then like I remember being like 7, 8 years old and like being like 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning and like jumping up and down on the end of my dad's bed, like being, can we go go-karting and stuff? So it's fair to say it kind of became an obsession quite early on.
Wow. And do you think that was that his intention to put you down that path as a driver, or was it simply the case that you loved it so much that led to you becoming so fantastic?
I think my dad, like, he was keen for me to try it, but he was never like a pushy parent in the sense that he like, oh yeah, my son's going to be a racing driver. Like he just wanted me to try it, and then I like fell in love with it, and then it was just something that we did together. Like it was just like how we sort of bonded and spent time together, and then like the career side of things kind of came like off the back of that.
And how long did it take for you to beat your dad in a go-kart?
Not that long. I actually remember there's like a funny story of when I was 9 years old, I think. So we were at a track called Clay Pigeon, which is like one of like the British Championship circuits. And I think it was the first year that I was doing like British level, like championship level go-karting. And we were on like a practice day on like a Friday afternoon, me and my friend Jamie and like both our dads who both did like racing stuff when they were younger. So they obviously thought they were like, you know, hot shots, and they knew what was right and wrong. And they were shouting at us on the sidelines going, come on boys, you need to be on this line. Like we would beat you in a go-kart. So over like the hour lunch break that we had like throughout our practice day, they spoke to the circuit owner if they could get a couple of go-karts to like show us the lines of like where we should be. And they went out in front of us, and like we did like one lap behind them, just where they were like, oh yeah, follow us. And then we got bored, they were going so slow, so we like basically went past. They started doing their own thing, and we ended up lapping them in that same like session. So at that point they just kind of kept hush and let us do our thing.
Well, I mean, I love go-karting.
Do you?
Is it the case that I always think about this and trying to give myself excuses because I'm so heavy, presumably being a young 9-year-old must give you a big advantage over a fully grown adult, or you were just tactically better?
No, yeah, it does. The weight definitely plays a part in terms of like power and stuff like that. Obviously when you're like taking it seriously, like British level, like all the kids, like I was quite small when I was a kid. I was probably always like the smallest in like my year growing up and stuff like that. But you put like lead weight on the kart, so everyone has the same level playing field of like the weight of the driver. The go-kart, there's like a minimum weight you have to be, so like that kind of doesn't affect it at a serious level. But yeah, maybe my dads will probably use that as an excuse of why they were so
that's
slow.
good. So if I go go-karting with my mates, I'm going to give them all weighted backpacks.
Yeah, you could.
And then we'll be
way everyone out and make
good
sure you're
idea.
on a level playing field.
Oh, nice. So you were better than your dad quite quickly. And then how did it kind of transpire into being more of a kind of a career?
I think probably like the sort of turning point from like looking at it is like something I did at the weekends for fun, and then something where I was like, okay, this could be like a career, was probably when I was 10, because that's when I won my first British Championship sort of go-karting. So I was in the age category of 8 to 13-year-olds, and I was 10 and won the British Championship. So I think at that point I was like, okay, like I know I'm quite good at this thing and I love it a lot. So like I was obviously watching like Formula One and stuff like that, and I was kind of like, if I could do anything for like a job, that's where I want to be, like on the grid of a Formula One race.
Why do you think you were better than other people at that age? Also, it's crazy to think you know what you want to be when you're 10 years old.
Yeah, I really think it's honestly such a superpower, knowing what you want to do at such a young age and having that sort of like goal and that purpose. Like I feel really like lucky that I was in that position. I don't know why I was particularly good at it. I think, to be honest, like other sports when I was growing up, I never really like felt that I was like really good at it. So I think when I found racing and stuff like that, it was almost like a bit of an escape, where it was like, okay, I'm doing this thing, like helmets on, like you don't have to, you kind of zone in, you're not worried about anything else. I love the adrenaline. I love like the element of fear that comes with like, driving anything on the sort of limit. So yeah, it just really excited me, and I didn't really get that excited about other sports in comparison. Like I enjoyed other sports, but it didn't bring out the same side of me. So I think it was purely like that enjoyment and that element of like escaping everything else and just doing this thing that I just sort of fell in love with.
And did it occupy all of your time? Because like, were you missing out on any school to race, or was it the case it was simply a hobby on the side?
It quite quickly became something where I had to take time off of school, which was obviously a hard sort of thing to navigate. It was most of the British Championship race weekends were practice days were on the Fridays, so it would be sort of Thursday evening I'd get back from school, like me and my dad would pack the caravan up and we would basically go to the racetrack. So I'd have Friday off school, so the school would like give me work to do like when I was away at the weekends that I'd have to get done, so I could stay sort of on track with things. So I was quite lucky, I guess, that the school were quite supportive.
How much of the training, sorry, I'm a complete novice, but how much of it is like in a car? How much of it is like mental or like tactical, looking at pages or something? And yeah, and then do you do any like gym work or anything to like be stronger?
I think the best form of training, especially when you're a kid, it's actually just doing the thing itself. So like for me, it was just like the more time I could spend in the go-kart, the better I became. Gym wise, to be honest, at that age,
Probably not as a kid,
no,
yeah.
it wasn't really something that was at the forefront of my mind. There would be like, I guess, more coordination based stuff that by the time I was doing British Championship stuff, like, and also visualization, I'd say that was something that is introduced quite early on, like where you're kind of like, even when I'd be sat in like a classroom and I'd be like, meant to be looking at like studying, and I'd be like drawing like racetracks and like racing lines on like my notepad and stuff like that. Like, so I was just always like thinking about it in some way or another. But to be honest, yeah, the best form of getting better is actually just doing it and just driving.
I guess also if your mind is doing that consciously, you're in school drawing the racing line on a makeshift track, you're probably doing that in your sleep and your dreams as well.
Yeah.
Which is so often when someone takes up something new, you dream about that thing, because your brain is just like really fastly trying to learn and get better.
Yeah, you're just wired, and it's just all you can like think about. And that was racing for me. It was just like, just something that I was like, yeah, just every sort of minute of the day that I wasn't, doing something else, I was kind of just thinking about, an upcoming race that I had, and, maybe if I'd been at a race the previous weekend, because it's quite a regular thing, racing, in terms of like how often you compete. By the time I was like 8, I was probably racing like 3 weekends out of every month. So pretty much all of my weekends I was either, practicing, or I was at a competition somewhere around the UK, and then by the time I was 11 it was racing abroad as well. So a lot of the racing was out in Italy and in Europe. Makes
the marathon runners and Ironman of the world who do 1 or 2 a year seem a bit lazier, right?
I don't know if I call it lazy.
And so, June, you're winning races and things are going really well. Was it a perfect journey for those kind of early years, or how did it go up until kind of 17?
It's like the journey's never like perfect, but I loved every minute of it. But like for me, my situation, like quite early on in racing, even at like a go-kart level when you're 11, 12, like financially, like it puts a strain on things because it's such an expensive sport. Like there's no getting away from the fact that, you know, especially when I was competing at say British level when I was 10, you know, you've got to travel all across the country, like the fuel, then you've got to pay for like the tires, and at that level you're putting on, you know, £100 worth of tires every other time you're in the go-kart and stuff like that. So all of a sudden these costs like that are associated with the sport just start to rack up. And I remember being in that sort of age where I was 11, 12 and I was doing really well, but sort of knowing that my like mum and dad were like having to work their socks off to even like get me on the grid. So a lot of the battles were like away from actually doing the sport, like trying to find the backing to be able to compete and to look to go to the next level. And, you know, then we're flying to Italy for races and I've got to take my dad's got to take Wednesday to Friday off work to mechanic the go-kart, and like there was a lot of like stuff like that where it got tricky, I guess.
And at what point can someone start to make a career in motorsport? Is it only at the doing adult professional level, or at what point does that start to mean that you can take the pressure off your parents?
Financially, in terms of like the route to say Formula One, because obviously Formula One's the pinnacle of motorsport, you go through the go-karting ranks, and then when you're about 14, you can sort of 14, 15, you can step up into car racing, Formula 4, then you've got Formula 3, Formula 2, Formula 1. You only make money in Formula 1. Other than that, you're spending money, like it costs money. And then Formula 3, Formula 2, Formula 3, when I was sort of racing properly in 2021, you're talking over €1 million for a season in Formula 3, sorry. So you have to go out and find that through sponsorship. So like 80-90% of my sort of weekday, even being like a 14-year-old, was trying to write proposal decks for sponsors to try and raise money to go racing. So yeah, that's I guess a side of the sport which is very different. But everyone thinks, oh yeah, Formula 1 drivers make 30 million, 40 million. Like you look at the headlines of like a Lewis Hamilton, but like you've literally got to spend fortunes to get there.
Well, it's the same in like so many different sports. I mean, you see the top golfers, see the top tennis players, but the number that sit behind the ranks and who are fighting to break even with it, and the same in running and triathlon, I guess, as well. So, you go.
I guess, was Formula One like the aim? Yeah, and you like really believed you could get there.
Massively, yeah. That was what drove me. That was like watching. I remember, but it was like 2007, so it was the first year Lewis Hamilton basically rocked up to the Formula 1 grid, and you see this British driver, and he basically comes in from winning Formula 2, and he's right up the sharp end, nearly wins the World Championship in his first year. I remember being like watching the final race of the year with my dad, jumping up and down on the sofa at home, cheering him on, thinking like, that is so cool, I want to do that. So like Formula 1 was definitely the goal.
If you don't mind talking about it, what happened when you were 17, which kind of, really got in the way of that dream? Yeah,
so like fundamentally when I was 17, I had an accident, April 2017, where I became a double amputee as a result of a racing crash. So it was like any other sort of race day for me. It was in Formula 4, that was the level I was competing at. And in sort of those sort of levels of motorsport, normally the way sort of the progression works, so when you're younger, it's all based off age, and then it kind of gets to a point where it's like, okay, it's down to like your skill level and how well you do in these championships. So there's normally like a learning year in most of these categories. So normally when you make the step up from go-karts to racing, my first year of Formula 4, it was just about learning the car, learning the circuits, everything like that. And then in your second year, you try and win the championship. Like if you're good enough to win the championship or be right up there, then you can then make the step up the following year to Formula 3 and start that learning process again. So I was in the second year of doing Formula 4. So I'd had my learning year, had pole positions and podiums, but obviously not been able to compete at the top level of the championship because I was having this massive learning curve. So I kind of came into 2017 being like, this is going to be my year. I need to win this championship, get scouted by someone like a Red Bull or something like that. That was like, in terms of, like I say, from a financial point of view, that would have taken a lot of the burden off of me and my family, and finding sponsors is to basically impress on that level and it's sort of all the big bosses in Formula One sort of get them thinking this guy is like the next superstar. And my accident was at the second race weekend of the season. So there's 10 race weekends at that level across the calendar. My first weekend at Brands Hatch, which is my local track, went pretty well. I got podiums in all 3 races. I think I was sitting like second in the championship as I arrived at Donington Park, which was one of my favourite circuits and still is one of my favourite circuits actually, which everyone always kind of thinks, really? This is one of your favourite circuits? But it just naturally is. And yeah, any other race day, it was just one of those situations, unfortunately, wrong place, wrong time. It was we were on dry tyres, but it had started to rain, which as a racing driver are the trickiest conditions you sort of face. And the car up ahead had spun off on the racing line, and being sat so low down to the ground, I had 2 cars in front of me side by side blocking my vision, doing like 130 mile an hour, and they basically both pull out of the way of this stationary car last minute, and I'm presented with a car that's static and I'm doing 120 mile an hour, so I hit it, everything comes to a halt, and then obviously the result of that longer term was my double amputation. I'm so sorry, it's so scary. And no, it like gives me shivers, but yeah, do you remember it all, or is this all? Yeah, I remember it all. Yeah, it's so I was awake in the car after the accident for about 45 minutes, and then they put me into an induced coma. Except because the cars were basically like, they're made of carbon fibre, strong stuff, but the cars had been like basically where the collision was so impactful, had come together. The back of his car entered the front of my car, which is obviously what caused the damage to my legs. And in order to get me out of the car, they had to put me asleep so they could pull the cars apart. But yeah, I was awake for about 45 minutes, and then they put me into an induced coma, and that was on the Sunday afternoon. And my first memories are like the Wednesday afternoon, Thursday, the following week after all my surgeries, or the majority had happened.
And that's when you woke up having had the double amputees?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, so that all happened when I was in an induced coma. The majority of my surgeries, I had to have follow-up surgeries in little bits. I think I had about 9 or 10 surgeries, but like 5 or 6 of them happened when I was in that induced coma. So I'd had racing crashes before. It's part of motorsport. Like, you can't get away. There's that element of danger. Like, I remember being 8 years old and breaking my wrist. And then actually, funny enough, when I won my first British Championship in go-karts, so the first weekend of the year I won the race, and then on the Monday after the weekend, it was a bank holiday Monday, so me and my dad just went to our like local pub. I was just like playing out on like a swing set outside the pub, and he was just like having a bit of like a beer and some lunch, and I said, "Oh Dad, watch this." I was messing around on a swing and I like broke my wrist in 2 places, and I had to get like laser surgery and like to repair it in time, because the next race was 4 weeks after, and I'd broken my wrist, and it was meant to take 6 to 8 weeks to heal. So I had to basically see a specialist to accelerate it so I could get back for the second race of the season. So yeah, there was basically, I'm used to like breaking bones and having a bit of danger, but this crash I knew was like subconsciously I knew was worse than other crashes I'd had before, because I could just like, when I was in the cockpit and I was awake for that 45-minute period, you can see like the doctors' faces and people around you, and you kind of go to get out the car because you're full of adrenaline, but your body's telling you, no, I can't move right now. So like, I think I knew it was bad, but obviously you're never going to be able to tell that that's going to be the result of a crash. And
so you came out of the coma a few days later. How long does it take to be able to leave the hospital and like return to civilian life and continue your recovery? Yeah, so it was I was in hospital for about 5 weeks. So all my surgeries happened in that period, and then I was in sort of hospital for the last 2 weeks, was more just like waiting for everything to heal up to a point where they were happy for me to go home. And I was in hospital in Nottingham, which is about 3 hours from home, so it obviously added an extra bit of stress in terms of like my family and my friends being able to come up and see me. It wasn't like I was just round the corner. But yeah, so that was about 5 weeks in hospital. Then I came home, and then that rehab process goes on for a little while, it's fair to say. It was my accident was in April. I think I did any form of walking on prosthetics probably in like September of 2017, so probably about 3 or 4 months after my accident, I'd like sort of got on prosthetics for the first time. And then that sort of period
of learning to walk on prosthetics and be completely independent. It probably wasn't until a year after that, probably like July of 2018, that I was like, I wasn't walking with sticks, for example. I was just walking on my prosthetics, and I didn't have any like walking aids or anything like that.
Well, I mean, it seems actually to me, to someone who's relatively ignorant to the recovery journey, to be able to start walking on prosthetics just 3 months later is, I think, sounds really quite quickly. Did you ever believe that one day you'd go on to run a marathon and do an Ironman at that point when you're learning to walk again?
Absolutely not. No, I remember how strenuous it was, even just like, so when you learn to walk on prosthetics for the first time, you're in something called like parallel bars, which are basically like safety bars either side of you in case you have a bit of a wobble. And I remember it was like, such a 5 meters long, these parallel bars, and being sat in a chair at the end and like just using all my strength to like stand up, and then trying to work out and navigate how to use these prosthetics that I had no idea what I was doing on, and just to walk like 5 meters. So if you'd said to me at that point, how many years later you'll be running a marathon and doing like an Ironman, like there's no way that I'd have been able to comprehend that.
And so you were starting to learn to walk on the prosthetics in September. How long did it take you to experiment that you could run or learn to run?
So running was I actually tried cycling before I tried running, because the thing with running on prosthetics is the impact that it has on your body. Because when you're learning to walk on prosthetics again, they say that it's normally takes about 2 years for like all the sort of like inflammation and your like body to adapt and change to the new muscles you require, the muscles you use more to walk on prosthetics. Because there's some muscles now that I actively have to use more to walk on prosthetics than if I was able-bodied.
I mean, like your hip flexors, I imagine, are working much, much harder than
massively
in a conventional runner.
Yeah, 100%. So my hip flexor strength over that 2 year period built, and then also there's muscles that I now don't use that sort of you have muscle wastage. So in terms of like getting comfortable on like for running, that process kind of needs to happen. So then your body's like adapted, and then you can sort of learn to run. So it was probably about two and a bit years after my accident that I sort of first got on a set of running blades, and I just remember thinking, wow, these are like so weird. Like all of a sudden, like my walking prosthetics, it's all about stability and giving me confidence to be able to walk and step and do all this stuff without feeling like I'm going to fall over. And like the running blades aren't designed for that. They're designed to give you as much aid as possible to build momentum and speed and stuff like that. So it was just a very weird experience.
You also did get back in a car after the accident as well and start competing again, didn't you?
Yeah, so after my accident, I was in hospital for 5 weeks, and then 6 weeks after I came out of hospital, I got my race license back at Brands Hatch, which is my local track. I was driving a VW Beetle, so it was a very different car to a Formula 4 car, but I basically went out for the day using hand controls. There's a charity called Team Brit that basically look after veterans after they've had instances out in the war. So it's all adapted for like hand controls and designed for people that are using prosthetics. And I went there for the day just to trial it out. And then by the end of the day, they said, "Oh well, we've got an instructor here that can basically sit in the car with you and say whether you can get your license back, like whether you're capable enough of having a race license still." And we went out, and I got my race license back 11 weeks after. And then I believe it was about 11 months from the time of my accident to the time of like my first competitive race, which was actually in British Formula 3 rather than Formula 4, because I made a step up in category, because my thought process there was just I want to continue my career on the same trajectory as it was on if I hadn't had the accident, which that would have been my next step. So,
and is there not a part of you that's petrified of going that fast on a racetrack again, or you're able to put that to bed and carry on?
I remember on that day where I got my license back, the first probably like 5 to 10 laps of the circuit. So you're talking like 12, 15 minutes of driving. I remember this comfort zone that I had, which had always been behind the wheel of a racing car. Like that was where the muscle memory takes over, and I just was in my element. I remember the first 10 to 15 minutes being sat in the cockpit driving this car completely differently, because it was all hand controls and stuff, just feeling scared. And that for me was such a weird experience, because like I say, it was just something that I just didn't even have to think about. I could just jump in a racing car and just be like fine. And all of a sudden I was having to think about everything I was doing, and it was just so surreal and just didn't feel right. And then after about 10-15 minutes, it was like, okay, my nerves settled down a bit, and it was just, you start to then rebuild that muscle memory in a completely different way.
And I guess it must be actually very unlike most other sports, where you can have an accident like that and then continue to progress to an upper category. Mm-hmm. And presumably that's then you're accelerating and braking from the steering wheel.
Yeah, so I had to, so that day was quite interesting when I got my license back, because the controls at that time, I wasn't able to use my legs in terms of any inputs whatsoever, because it was so fresh after the accident. So it was all done on hand controls, like the throttle, the brake, the gears, everything like that. And I found it, even though I got the hang of it, it was still didn't really feel fluid and like effortless. So eventually, when we found out that, or when I sort of started the process of learning to race again, like properly, like at a high level, I had to basically redesign the controls from the ground up. I'd like pick the bits from that day that I thought were good, and then try and work out what we could do better with the other stuff. So I started using a simulator. My best friend was racing in Formula 4 as well, so I started basically going with him when he would do his preparation days before the events, and started his team let me jump on the simulator and basically started adapting like a steering wheel that I could use and stuff. Then we started adapting like pedals, and I realised that I could maybe brake with my right leg with, you know, a different prosthetic. So it was like a complete from the ground up rebuild. And then 11 months after, I was competing and using these hand controls and this whole system that I'd like basically pioneered.
What was your mindset like through all of this to then, I can't even begin to imagine what it was like at the start, and then believing that you can get back to, you know, racing again, and then signing up for an Ironman? Like, what was it like?
I think, I think for me it was like, basically when I was in hospital, I was having lots of conversations with like my friends who are all obviously from the motorsport world. So it was like mechanics, engineers, and eventually when you put like enough people from like that world into one room, you're going to start talking about motorsport. Even though I'd had this racing crash and it would be easy to like want to blank it out, like that's all I know, and that's like what I do. And same for my friends and stuff. And one of them said, had I heard of a guy called Alex Zanardi, who I'd not heard of at the time. And he basically had a racing crash, became a double amputee, and raced again in different categories as well. So he sort of was, I guess, the spark, that sort of light bulb moment of like, oh, maybe this isn't like the end of my racing career. Maybe I can drive again. And then once I kind of got out of hospital, focused on the rehab, started that whole journey off, I still was very in tune with like the sport, and it just, my mind was constantly like working of like, how can I do this? What would work for me control wise? What wouldn't? And it kind of just like spiraled from there. It was like one of those like things that was just like a little thought in the back of my mind, and next thing you know, it was just like, it just happened. It was such a weird like process, how it just went by so quick.
Wow. And I guess that's what got you back into the car, got you back at racing. You said that you started running after cycling. Mm-hmm. What was it that got you to run those 2 years later?
Do you know what? It was actually, I did a documentary before the Paralympics in 2020, and I tried lots of different sports, because as much as I was racing at the time and that was my sport, I was like, I've always been a sporty person, so I've always been interested in like, particularly after my accident, of like how, you know, people adapt things and how you're still able to, you know, be involved in sport, because I like doing sport with my friends. Like I want to go and be able to like play football and do this, that and the other, like basically get involved and try things as much as possible. So I did this documentary and met some Paralympians before the games, and I met Johnny Peacock, and Richard Whitehead. I've met him too, he's a great guy. But yeah, Johnny Peacock, basically I was meeting him, so I had like a sort of 2-week sort of training camp where I got on prosthetics and sort of went away and just at first was just standing on the running blades and just getting the feel of them, and then like eventually it built up until this day where like Johnny, we had like a 110 meter track out, and I watched him sprint down this track, and I was just in awe, and then he was teaching me how to do it. So that's kind of fundamentally where it started, was like just getting a lesson or just seeing someone running on running blades in like full force and thinking, wow, that I could eventually like run on running blades and be that confident. So that was kind of where it all came about.
And how long did it take to go from there to, like Anya said, signing up for that Ironman?
So that was it back in 2020. So yeah, it was the Ironman was in the end of last year. So it was a good three and a bit year period that led me to that. And actually, in February of last year of 2024, when I signed up for the Ironman, the furthest I'd sort of run was 5k in one hit.
Wow.
So yeah, when I signed up for the Ironman, it wasn't like I was out running half marathons or I'd done a marathon by itself. Like the furthest I'd done is 5k, and like 5k on prosthetics hurt, like it was sore, like it battered my body up. So when the idea for the Ironman came about, like that was the thing that scared me the most. Like the swimming, I'd had some experience with swimming. My technique was terrible. I wasn't quick. But I'd done a little bit of swimming after my accident because it was non-weight bearing. It was a good form of like recovery for me. And cycling, my first challenge I did for Comic Relief, I'd done a little bit of cycling. So again, not quick, not set up right, but just like I'd been able to cover some distance on a bike. So it was definitely the run that scared me the most about the whole project, and was like the thing that everyone around me was like worried about, whether the whole thing would come off was kind of, we thought could be down to that really.
And I guess like, it must have worried them, it must have worried you. What was it that like meant that you thought, despite all of that, despite knowing how much it hurts to run 5k, you thought, screw it, let's do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that I'd seen people on prosthetics like doing marathons and stuff like that, I like knew it wasn't like it was impossible. I just had to find a way to make running as enjoyable and as comfortable for me as possible. And it just meant I had to invest a lot of time and effort into particularly just getting the fit of the prosthetics right. That's a massive thing. I mean, I guess the way you can sort of put it into comparison is like, if you get a pair of running shoes that don't fit your feet, like you don't, it doesn't really encourage you to go for a run. And when you're on prosthetics and the sockets are, so in tune with you, like if they're not fitting right, it can be so off-putting to go out for a run, because that no matter how long I go out for, this is just going to hurt for the sake of hurting. So for me, it was like, particularly with an Ironman where you've got 3 disciplines, I knew that it was so important that I could go out for a run in the morning, say, and that it wouldn't batter my body up to the point where I couldn't do my afternoon swim session or afternoon bike ride. Like I had to be able to do those 2 disciplines to the best of my abilities as well as the running. So it just meant that when I started training for the Ironman in October of 23 and I had a year to go, the first few months, rather than actually like being full steam ahead into run training, I was doing that with cycling and swimming, but the running probably didn't start until February of the following year, because that's how long it took to get the prosthetics and everything in the right place. So it was kind of a bit counterintuitive to like not get practicing running for the first few months and just actually work on like how the technique would work best for my body and how we could get the prosthetics to be comfortable enough to allow me to train like seamlessly.
And I guess with all of that in mind, I'm thinking about it from a lens of a triathlete who's got different kit. They've got to get out of their wetsuit, get on their bike with their bike shoes, and then put on their running shoes. Yeah. Presumably you need different prosthetics for the different legs.
Yeah, so swimming, no prosthetics needed for swimming, because it's majority upper body dominated anyway. So yeah, we didn't really even try and invest any time into building swimming prosthetics. It's just not really doesn't really make sense. So for me, it was like, okay, that one was the easiest because it meant that prosthetics weren't going to hinder me. It was just about, building my upper body strength and just my technique out in the pool and just doing the hours basically and training. So the swimming was probably the easiest to set up. Then you come out the water and you've got to get into cycling legs. So I have a different set of cycling legs to running legs. So I get out of the water, transition into my cycling prosthetics. And the trickiest thing with the cycling, I guess the challenge with that, is that when I was actually on the bike, having done a challenge before, when I was up and cycling, I felt pretty comfortable on the bike. The hardest thing, particularly when it comes to training, is like being able to start at junctions and sort of be safe on the roads, because normally when you're clipped into pedals, most people twist their leg in and out to get in and out of a cleat. I could do that on my right leg because I have my knee. On my left leg I don't have my knee, so I couldn't twist my leg to come out of the pedal. So we basically had to find a way for me to be able to get on and off the bike independently when I'm doing my training rides. And you found using a magnetic cleat, well, it was strong enough to keep my foot on the pedal, but not too strong that I couldn't, if I pulled up hard enough, get my leg to come off the pedal. So yeah, that was a bit of a learning curve and a bit of a process.
And I guess even then when it comes to a triathlon, you need to get from the water to your legs.
Yeah.
And how do you do that?
I hop into my wheelchair. So I have my wheelchair just outside of the water, hop into my chair, push myself through transition to where my bike and my legs are, and then out the wheelchair, legs on, grab the bike and go.
I mean, most people, including myself, when they tell someone they've done an Ironman, people are like, wow, that's really impressive. Like, do you realise how impressive it is to do an Ironman with all of these additional challenges? Like, it's so inspiring.
Yeah, it's just weird. It's just like like everyone's got like different like challenges with like doing an event of that scale or anything, like, you know, putting yourself out there. So I kind of just, I don't really view it any differently to that. It's just like my challenges are just slightly different, I guess, what most people do. But it's just like, I've always just kind of had that like sort of like mindset of like, you know, just tinkering away, just figuring out, like, it's like a puzzle of like, how can I make this work? How can I get from A to B through transition? And then it's just kind of, eventually works itself out.
Did you ever believe it wasn't going to be possible to do the full Ironman?
I think during those first few months where I wasn't running, like, we were having lots of like meetings with Comic Relief and my trainers and stuff, and they were like, you know, there's a lot of pressure from like their side that they're investing all this time and effort into this challenge, and obviously people want the challenge to be a success and for me to be able to do it. So when you're like 3 months into like a year preparation and you're sitting there in meetings and saying, oh yeah, I haven't been able to do any running yet because we're still working on the running prosthetics, eventually like people run out of confidence that this is actually going to eventually materialize into like a working system. So they were coming up with like backup plans of maybe you should do the marathon in like a race chair and stuff like that, where you use your arms rather than your legs. But for me, it was like when my trainer first showed me the Ironman, especially out in Kona in Hawaii, like I wanted to do it as close to if I was able-bodied as possible. And I knew fundamentally that I could run on prosthetic legs. Okay, I could only do 5K, but I can do that. I knew that I could cycle a conventional bike, and I was just struggling to get on and off, and I knew I could swim. So it was like, I don't really want to stray too far away from that. And like, just because it takes a bit of time to set up in the first place doesn't mean it's like impossible. It's
incredible. How did the race go and how was the response to it?
I mean, yeah, the race itself was crazy. I mean, obviously when you do like a year-long prep for something, like the anticipation, excitement's there. I remember being like just arriving in Hawaii and you're just like thinking, oh God, like this is it. Like this is what a year of hard work has sort of like prepared me for. Like you start to obviously have those like silly little doubts of like, am I prepared enough? Like, am I going to be able to handle everything that's coming my way? I'd had to do 2 half Ironmans to qualify for Hawaii. So I'd done like half of all the distances, but like throughout my training, I'd never done a full marathon. I'd never done the full 180K on the bike. I'd done the full distance in the swim quite regularly in training because just my swim workouts were most of the time like over an hour long. So it was kind of the swim I was confident with, although you've got the factor of it being in the ocean and any other challenges that come your way with that. So I got stung by a couple of jellyfishes out in Hawaii, so that was an interesting one. But yeah, no, it was just pure excitement really when I got out there. And then the race itself was really like special, like in terms of the atmosphere, and it just felt like such a privilege to be a part of this cool thing. And just even going around like the event itself, seeing, I think it's the same with a lot of sporting events and physical challenges like that, you know, everyone on that start line has like had their own challenges and had to overcome their own things to even get to the start line in the first place. It kind of just like felt like a big celebration of all like the hard work that everyone had put in.
And how did it feel running down the finish line red carpet? I know it's made me cry a few times. How did it make you feel?
Yeah, I mean, at that point I was a broken man, it's fair to say. About 14 and a half hours in. The marathon definitely felt like it was, it felt like a lifetime I was out on the roads for, and it was quite, a lot of the course in Hawaii was quite empty. So the first sort of 8-9K is all in town, and then basically up until the last 2K, you're basically out on the long highway in the dark by yourself. Like, you got the aid stations, but that's it. So I think that more than anything, by the time I got to the finish line, I was just so excited to see my family and friends, and like knowing that this like whole big project that has sort of been years in the making was finally, like, we were at the end of it all. It was really like emotional, and a few tears came my way for sure, and it was quite overwhelming, like the noise that everyone made. Like, I feel like the whole sort of Ironman community, triathlon community, really got behind like my story and like what we were doing, being out there for comic relief, and it was super special. Like, that will be such a memory that I will never lose, like that moment.
And comic relief are making a documentary about it. That's not out yet, is it?
No, so that documentary comes out during Red Nose Day week. So in the middle of March is it will be airing then, so on BBC One. So it's going to be weird to see it cut down like a year's worth of work into an hour. Like, I'm sure it's hopefully it'll capture as much of it as possible. But it's I'm excited at the same time. I'm really excited to see it.
I can't wait to watch. And I guess looking ahead to your fitness, do you have any goals? Do you have something you've done what some people view as the hardest thing in the world, an Ironman? Like, what do you want to do next?
I don't know. I definitely thrive off of having like something in the pipeline, like a goal. I think for me, like I have really enjoyed triathlon in terms of like the variety to it. Like, I loved getting up each day and like the sessions being different, being able to do different disciplines, different days. Like, it really felt like every day was like a new sort of day and a new challenge. I'm intrigued like to push myself further, like from a physical point of view, and having done the Ironman and the triathlon, like I think the idea of potentially representing like my country at like a Paralympics, which is maybe not after my accident. I think I was not against like that, but I think everyone kind of assumed after my accident, like even like all my mates and people close to me, like, oh, are you gonna like just be like a Paralympian now? Like it was this easy thing to do. I think like sometimes that there's a bit of a stigma, like, oh, if you have a disability, why don't you just like, if you are into sport, just go and do the Paralympics. So I think in a way there was like an element of me being like, well, obviously one, focusing on my motorsport, but two, being like, it's not easy, like that doesn't just happen. But now I feel like I'm in a place where I've put in the work, and I feel in a really good position to like invest a few years into trying that journey out a bit more.
Can I ask one last closing question? Do you have a lesson that you've learned along this journey, like the most important thing to you?
Most important thing to me along this journey, I think, and it's probably quite cliche, but like training for the Ironman and like investing a year, like the event itself was special, but actually a lot of like my fondest memories are from like the grind of it and like the year build up to the event itself. And I think like during that year-long process, I like fell in love with like the process of it all, of like seeing those improvements day to day, of getting better at things, being able to go out on a bike ride by myself and not have to worry for the first time. Like, those are the little wins along the way that I feel like really made a difference. So I think for me, it's like the end goal's nice, and it's cool to like be able to pull something off, and to go and break the world record was great. But like, I just want to keep like investing in that, like getting better each day sort of mentality. And I think that's a good, if you do that, I think you're in a good place already.
Yeah, you got to enjoy the journey, not just the destination.
Exactly.
Amazing. Well, we're going to segue over to Steph with our coaching tip of the week.
My top tip today is on running trainers. Choosing a pair of shoes can feel like an absolute minefield. There are so many different options on the market with so many different brands, and what works for your friend might not work for you. I'd recommend heading to your local running store, getting some recommendations, finding out whether you need a neutral or more supportive shoe, and trying them on the treadmill. This will help secure the perfect fit for you.
Thanks for that, Steph. I'm going to bring us back with a discussion sent in from one of our lovely listeners. Billy, you've tackled one of the toughest endurance challenges, the Ironman triathlon. Do you think endurance sports builds resilience, or do naturally resilient people gravitate towards them?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think both, actually. I do think naturally, like, if you are someone who is a resilient person who likes a challenge, like if you actively seek challenge in like your day to day, I feel like you're naturally going to be drawn towards something like an Ironman. But equally, I feel like I could very much see, and I see, like, say my friends, for example, that sign up, not even for Ironmans, but like for marathons or half marathons, like, and I still see them, like, all of a sudden when you, like, you're disciplined and you build that into your life like that, I think that just it naturally, like, increases your resilience to other things as well. So I'd say a bit of both.
Do you think you'd have ever done an Ironman if it hadn't been for your accident?
I generally don't know the answer to that question, but I think that's a positive thing that I don't know the answer to that question, because I have done it. I have done it now. So it's like, you can always say what if, but like my journey, my path, my life has ended up going this way. And yeah, I don't know I've done it before, which makes me feel like proud, because it's like, it's not like the accident has like shut off opportunities for me. In fact, like, if you look at it in some ways, it's probably opened myself up to do these sorts of things that maybe I wouldn't have done before.
Yeah.
Do you have an answer?
I don't know. It's a really good question. Do you have a thought on this?
I would imagine that I think it's the resilience in people that means you build yourself up and you lean towards these things.
Yeah.
Because I think if someone had no air of resilience to them, they would probably not go down the route of going out in the rain and doing park run and then doing a 10K and then building up to doing these big things. My guess is that I think it's more innate than it is absorbed. But it's obviously not 100%.
I guess you have to have a certain amount of resilience just to sign yourself up for it in the first place. Like, I think if you've got that much, to you, then you can build, more resilience through like the process of training. But I guess you have to have something in the first place inside of you to get you to even consider it.
Like, Andy, what got you to sign up for your first marathon?
There has to be a part of me that believed I could do it.
Yeah.
So you must have something installed in you. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we're aligning that there's a little bit more
innate
than
potentially.
It is,
You swayed me.
Okay, anyway. Right, moving on to some slightly sillier, this or that. Billy, would you, if you had to snog, marry and avoid...
You're going to get me in trouble here.
Anya, no, I'm joking. Snog, marry and avoid, swim, bike and run.
Oh, okay, swim, bike, run. I would snog, run. I would marry, bike, and I would avoid swim.
Really? Because you said the swim was the easiest one to...
It's the easiest, but I do, obviously a lot of my training was in a pool, and sometimes it is quite monotonous and it's quite boring. But one thing I love about the bike is like how far you can go and how much you can see, and getting out like outdoors and doing that. So I do really like that. And also I love speed anyway. So when you're going down a nice descent on the bike, that gets a bit of adrenaline going. So I think the bike for me is the one that I like the most. And then running, as much as it's probably the toughest, like again, I get quite a lot of satisfaction from going for a run.
I can resonate with those answers. Linked very similarly then, almost exactly based on what you just said about the speed of cycling and a bit of fun going downhill. Would you rather never cycle again or never be able to drive a car faster than 30 kilometers an hour?
Oh, that's horrible, that is.
So you can cycle at any speed?
So I can cycle at any speed.
Or you can only drive...
No, I need to be able to drive quicker than that. I need that. I love cycling. I need speed. Yeah. I need to be able to drive at over 30 kilometers an hour.
Fair enough. And last one, would you rather, if you got a day out on holiday, would you rather go for a hilly bike ride or a hot run?
Hills are a struggle for me on the bike, like having basically 90% of my power out of one leg.
Yeah.
Steep hills for me on the bike. I've had some moments where there's been a few effing and blinding words where I've gone on a route and not planned it properly and ended up with a really steep climb. So yeah, maybe I'd go on a hot run.
Okay. Sunny's day run rather than a hilly cycle.
I think
Fair
so.
enough. Do you have a preference?
Hot run.
Hot run.
I'm a runner. What would you do?
I'm a chunky man, so I would go hot run as well and avoid the hills. I think we're unanimous on that one. Do you want to, do you want to ask Billy the final question?
So our final closing question, which we ask everybody. This would be interesting for you. So we're going to ask you to design your hypothetical dream race.
Okay.
So what it is, and I guess this could be like a lot of things for you, the distance, the food and drink at the finish, and who's going to present you with your medal.
Is this a physical race?
Well, normally we ask a running race.
Yeah,
We've had
but
triathletes that we allow them to pick between triathlon and running, or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess you can pick a running race, you can pick a triathlete, you can pick a
Race
motor race, or you can
combine?
Yeah,
Can I combine?
Your dream race.
Can I combine? Well, I'd definitely do. I reckon maybe like a sprint triathlon to start. Am I picking locations for each discipline, or is it just one venue? I think one venue for the whole thing.
You start in this place, and then you need to finish.
Do you know what? Then I'd do, because I've done Hawaii now, which is where the world champs are held every other year for the Ironman. Nice is the other place for the world championships for triathlon. So maybe I would do some form of a sprint triathlon in Nice, and then afterwards you finish the sprint triathlon and you get in a car and you do the Monaco Grand Prix.
That's cool.
That's pretty close to it.
It's really close. I've cycled from Nice to Monaco.
Yeah, so I would combine the two and then finish line food, 5 guys for me.
And who would present you with your award?
Who would present me with my award? If we're going to do the Monaco Grand Prix, needs to be, or maybe like an Ayrton Senna. He's one of my racing heroes alongside Lewis Hamilton. So either a Lewis Hamilton or an Ayrton Senna.
Yeah.
Do you want maybe a triathlete in there as well? Maybe one of the Brownlee brothers, actually. I'm going to go for a three-man setup with one of the Brownlee brothers, Lewis Hamilton and Ayrton Senna, present the winner.
Wow. And how do we make the timings work of this? Is it that you get your time of your sprint triathlon added with your 1 lap, or how does it quite work? And is there a fourth transition, or sorry, a third transition?
There's going to be a third transition, so you're going to come off your marathon, absolutely, or not your marathon if we do a sprint triathlon.
Off your 5K.
Off your 5K, you're going to be absolutely covered in sweat. And then you've got to get overalls on, helmet on, jump in the car. This is all transition time, and then let's do like a 10 lap.
10 laps?
10 laps around Monaco.
Okay.
At the end. Yeah.
And to what extent do you think your driving performance would be hampered by your triathlon fatigue? Or do you think it wouldn't?
Glad that I've designed the race and then we're not doing an Ironman beforehand, because I think if you'd said to me after 14 and a half hours of, you've got to drive 10 laps of Monaco now, I think I would have crashed very quickly.
Wow, well that sounds super fun. If you could help us organise this, I think this could be a really fun stag do, I think.
I didn't know I was organising it as well. I'll stick to the creative.
Well, no, I think that sounds absolutely fantastic. And I mean, honestly, it's incredible to hear about your story and everything you've achieved, and June, I cannot wait to watch the documentary in March.
Yeah.
And then also everything that you go on to achieve thereafter as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks.
Today's podcast is powered by Runna. Runna is the #1 rated running coaching service worldwide, and whatever your running goal, whether you're looking to do your first 5K, improve your time over the 10K, or even run a marathon or an ultramarathon, we'll build you the personalized training for you to help you get there and enjoy the process along the way. If you want to download the Runna app, you'll get 2 weeks for free with code podcast25. And if you're already a Runna customer, you can head to the premium offers section where we've got a 15% off discount for you off any of our Runna merchandise.
And if you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, subscribe. And if you loved it, give us a 5-star rating. And we'll be back next week with another inspiring guest. See you then.